Welcome to Allies or Enemies. I'm Jess.
And I am Sean, and today we are talking about In the Footsteps of Marie Curie, and our copy was provided for review, but the thoughts in this video are all our own. And In the Footsteps of Marie Curie is a 2 to 4 player game designed by Florian Fay.
And it's all about the life of Marie Curie, and how you play is a little bit of engine building, a little bit of resource management, and a lot of dropping cubes through this awesome cube tower. But before we get too into it, let's look at how it plays.
You start the game with an empty science lab, an objective tile, and a thirst for knowledge. On your turn, you will first take the cubes depicted by the workshop marker and drop them into the tower, which will only drop out some of what you put in. Then you either collect up 3 of the cubes that fell out and put them in your Erlenmeyer flask, or you write a thesis by taking a book and gaining the bonus on the back. Either way, you can then take actions, which include purchasing an activity card and getting its bonus, validating an experiment by paying the cost and taking the benefit, as well as increasing how many cubes you can take or hold, validating your objective tile, or transforming your resources. Then you move the workshop tile and the next player does some science of their own. If anything you do triggers a watch icon, you move the marker up the timeline, and if you reach the end of the timeline, the game is over and players count their VP tokens, including the Marie Curie tile if they own it, and then the greatest scientist is named.
The star of the show really is that cube tower, and it works really well. It's always a surprise of how many come out, because you could put 4 in and have like 1 come out, or you could have 8 come out if a whole bunch have been stuck in there.
Yeah, it's magic. It's crazy to me like that it works so well, because you just drop them in, some don't come out, they just fall in these little ledges. And we experimented with it a little bit. We kind of have a rule, like just drop them in normal. But we didn't find that there was any way that anyone else dropped them in that caused trouble. I bet that if you want to, you could chuck them at just the right angle, but just don't.
Yeah.
But I think you'd really have to experiment with it to find a way to break it, which is great.
Yeah, although I feel like you say you're cursed by the dice gods, I feel like I'm cursed by the cube tower, because I always just kept getting black cubes, and you always got the better cubes, but that didn't have anything to do with how we dropped it. That was just a little bit of bad luck on my end.
Yeah, it is fun though when you get a whole, especially when you know that like the silver and the gold have been like collecting in there wherever they are in like the void of cubes. I haven't looked in it, so I just have like imagination of what's inside. But you know that those are collecting, and then you just drop in a couple black and all of this like jackpot falls out. That is really fun.
Yeah, and it is a very light game, but there are like decisions that you need to make, because you are managing those cubes, you're figuring out when to convert them, you're figuring out when to get those cards, and those cards get stronger the more of them you have. So you are sometimes thinking, okay, well, the bonus I get right now isn't that good, but if I get another one, that next bonus is going to be really good.
Yeah, you definitely find yourself specializing in some of those different cards, and some of them have slightly different paths. Like it's very much a gateway game, but it does still have slightly different paths because of those different columns that you've got of those cards, but also how you have those, like, what are they, Erlenmeyer flasks? Like the beakers and the flasks. Those can change things, because one of them lets you have more cubes to save, and one of them lets you grab more cubes. Obviously, that is going to change how the game plays a little bit.
Yeah, and I like that because it's a gateway game, you definitely want to be increasing how many cubes you're grabbing and how many beakers you're getting, but it's driving you to do that, because that's one of the key ways you get your points. So for people who maybe don't see that strategy, you are still going to be like motivated to do that, because you're going to just want to grab more and store more.
Yeah, and they're little mini quests. Like you just naturally want to complete those quests. But this is a game of very few points as well, which is interesting, that our games have generally been like 12 to 8 to 7 kind of things. So it's a very low scoring game, which both means that kind of everything you do is kind of important, but also, and this is nice for a gateway game, if you don't do that well, you're not going to feel like you got creamed. Like no one's gonna get beaten like 60 to 10. The worst it's going to be is like 8 to 5 kind of thing.
Yeah, that is true. But I really am enjoying this whole series of In the Footsteps of. So this is the second one of the series. The first one is In the Footsteps of Darwin. And I love that it's showcasing these brilliant scientists and doing these light gateway entry-level games where it's a good solid game in itself, but it's also being able to incorporate the lives of these scientists.
Yeah, and I love that it's got like the booklet of information as well, which is really, there's 2 books in it. So there's the rule book, and then just as fat as that, there's a book of just all these facts. And it's like, it's pretty legit. Like it's got a bunch of stuff in there. And I thought, I already knew quite a bit about Marie Curie, but reading through that, I did learn some things. And it's got a fun thing at the back of it too, that just, it's like kind of for kids teaching you about radioactivity, which I definitely am. It's for kids and me learning about radioactivity, and I thought that was pretty cool too.
Yeah, and I do think this one in particular really focuses on the life of Marie Curie, because every time it progresses, it's going through different years of her life with a nice little artwork of her life.
Yeah, I found this one even more than the In the Footsteps of Darwin, and I would really like to play that again, because we played it once, and I went into it, I was confused, because I thought it was going to be the big Darwin game, because they both came out at the same time. And we started to play it, and I was like, this is not what I expected. And then I think you were like, no, this is a totally different game. And so it just took me a bit to adjust, and it just wasn't what I expected. But I would love to, now that we've played this, to give that one another whirl. But let's move into some of the specific bits of it. So let's start out with the components.
So in terms of the components, first of all, I'm again going to start talking about that cube tower. It looks great, it works great, but we've already spoken a whole lot about that. So moving on to the general art, I think it looks really lovely.
Yeah, I think generally works pretty well. Those flasks are nice, they're clear, all of the iconography is clear. This is, I think that it is all icons. I don't think that there's any actual language in it. I think it's all language independent, which is always good, especially for this sort of thing. Cards are great. I really don't have a big complaint here.
Yeah, the timeline looks really nice, and then all of the, just the cover and the life of Marie Curie is beautifully illustrated. So I agree, that cubes and things aren't fancy, but they really don't need to be.
Yeah, the cubes are just cubes. They come in black, gold, and silver. There's nothing too fancy about them, but let's move on to the replayability.
This is a really quick, light game. So a lot of the replayability just comes from the fact that it is like a quick changing puzzle. But some of those pieces of the puzzle change because there are going to be different cubes that you get from the cube tower. How you're spending those cubes will change. The beakers and the Erlenmeyer flask will have different quests. Then how you spend those cubes for the cards, for the different columns they go in, those will change things a little bit as well. And you have a starting goal, and it's minor because it's just 1 point, but every point makes a difference in this game.
Yeah, those little mini goals are probably the biggest point of variability, but those are only one, or I think one of them is worth 2 points between the players, but it will focus you, and it kind of gives you something to drive towards. So this game plays at 2 to 4 players, and there's not a lot of difference between player count. You're going to get kind of roughly the same number of turns. They've got 4 different little thingies, I don't know what to call them, but for the cubes that you put in, and those are going to change kind of how quickly that time marker moves. So in a 2-player game, it moves almost every time. And then it's going to move slower and slower, depending on if you're 3 and 4. So you're going to end up with vaguely the same number of turns. I think in 3, we felt like we maybe had a few more turns, but also this game is just so fast. Each turn is going to take seconds. It's really, really fast. So I don't think you're going to find that this particularly drags even at a lot of players. And I think even with newer players, because they're going to pick up pretty quick. You get some cubes, you use those cubes to get other stuff. It's a fairly simple puzzle, but it's a pretty quick moving puzzle.
Yeah, and I think there might be a few small minor differences because there are some things on the timeline that let you like trade a cube for a point. And so at 2 players, you'll have a pretty good idea of when that can come. And you can try and plan for it at 3 or 4, but it could just be that there are a couple of turns that move faster than you expect and you're not quite set up for it. But overall, it does play very quickly. It's about 20 to 40 minutes, so like 10 minutes per player probably on average. And I think it works at all player counts.
Yeah, I do think, though, you're right about that timeline thing, because this is such a, like, the points are fairly low and you kind of need to get all the ones you can. You really do need to be able to get those. So at 4 players, you really do have to plan for that. And you'll find that in the first game, a lot of the first-time players are going to not really appreciate how important those are. And I think as you've played a few games, you're really going to be like, I gotta have a silver put aside, like, at least a couple clock things ahead of that happening, because I'm really going to need that point. So that's probably the biggest thing. But yeah, it works perfectly fine 2 to 4. At 2, we didn't feel like we were missing anything. At 4, we didn't feel like it was going too long.
So this is a quick, light game, and I think works really well for gateway gamers. I think there is enough there for more experienced gamers, but it would be more of a beginning of the night, quick type of game, as opposed to a focal point.
Yeah, I was surprised by this one. I saw it at Essen, and I saw that a lot of people seem to be playing it, and they seem to be into it. But even still, when we played it, I was like, oh, this is like, there's more here than I expect. There's still, this is not like, if you're expecting like Feast for Odin or Gaia Project, this is not that. This is very, very quick. This is really just, you get resources, you spend those resources on things. There's not a lot of steps to that, but it still is pretty fun. And we played with 2 other like gamers, and everyone at the table enjoyed it. I don't know if this is something that we would play, but like you say, it's got that super fun thing of dropping the cubes into the tower, which is like that focal point for the game. And it moves really fast, not that many rules. And for kids, you can teach them stuff about Marie Curie. So I think there's quite a lot to like in this package.
Yeah, and if you don't like luck, though, I saw that cube tower can sometimes feel very unlucky, and that's part of the fun. And because it's a quick game, I don't think that particularly matters if you have a game with a lot of poor luck, but do bear that in mind. And if you really like scientists, then I think this is a great game for people who really like scientists.
And that is it. That is In the Footsteps of Marie Curie. Have you played this? Have you played the Darwin one? Do you think it's worth us checking that one out again? Because I am kind of interested in it. And what other recent gateway games would you recommend?
Or games about scientists would you recommend? And as usual, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you next time for another game.